Support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
There is an old Chinese proverb that says, "Tell me and I'll forget, show me and I may remember, but involve me and I'll understand." The concept of being involved seems to be more than germane to the very acute debates that go on in our communities these days, from race relations to voters' rights to sexual orientation to Confederate legacies to roads to classroom funding and everything in between. In the historically congenial South, all issues now are fair game. Welcome to the longest running and the most widely watched source of Carolina business and public policy. On this edition, both General Assemblies throw around the word reform. Ethics reform, tax reform, education, and DOT reform, to mention just a couple. There will be part, and they will be part of our dialogue this time. And later on, North Carolina's Secretary of Revenue, Jeffrey Epstein.
Major funding also by Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Chris Fitzsimon of NC Policy Watch, Mike Brenan from BB&T, and special guest Jeffrey Epstein, Secretary, North Carolina Department of Revenue. Here's Chris William.
Hello, welcome to our program. Chris, good to have you back. Mike, good to have you back.
Thank you.
Too.
Thank you, Chris. Good to be with you.
HB2. Now, I'm looking at you. I'm going to give you a chance to answer that from the South Carolina perspective. Chris, HB2. So North Carolina, and these are my words, North Carolina has crafted over the decades this very careful image of a progressive New South state with a lot of great, a lot of great people, a lot of great momentum, and then Amendment 1, voter ID, and then HB2 come along in a Republican-controlled General Assembly. No matter how you come down on politics, has HB2 eviscerated a lot of the brand of North Carolina, or is this a short-term blip?
I wish it was a short-term blip. I'm really concerned that this will do long-term damage. And a lot of people think HB2 is just about bathrooms, but it's really not. It's about a very weak non-discrimination standard. The General Assembly and the governor actually went out of their way to single out LGBT people and not protect them in jobs and public accommodations. It also removed the right of workers who were fired because they're Jewish or Christian or African American to sue in state court. Mississippi is the only other state in the country that does not allow people to sue in state court if they're illegally fired. So what we have here is a tremendous damage to our brand. Again, forgetting the politics. When you see people all over the country, there's stories in newspapers in London about discrimination, and they talk about Mississippi now and North Carolina because of HB2. And I think this will take a generation to overcome, and I hope our state leaders, regardless of their political affiliation, will realize the damage it's doing to our economy and actual human beings, but our economy and the brand and the future of our state.
Are you encouraged that they will? You encouraged that they're enough reasonable folks?
No, and I want to be encouraged, and there were some discussions about it, and there's a lot of finger pointing about Charlotte should repeal its ordinance first, the General Assembly should do this. My view all along has been, let's put the bathroom issue aside and set up a commission. I applaud folks who want to, let's talk about how we treat transgender people, but in the meantime, I believe our General Assembly should pass a non-discrimination statute that includes sexual orientation and gender identity to make it clear, and leave out public facilities if you want to, but make it clear that you should not be allowed to be fired if you're gay, you should not be allowed to be refused a taxi cab or a hotel room, make a strong statement. I think the governor and the General Assembly should do that. I think that would clear up a lot of the issues, and then let's have a public education program and talk about transgender issues and facilities. And it's interesting to be on with somebody from South Carolina when Governor Nikki Haley decided that South Carolina did not need a version of HB2.
Well, in fairness, it's because North Carolina already stepped on that landmine, and Nikki Haley was not going to let that happen. Let me ask you this. Doesn't Charlotte municipal leadership have some equity and some skin in this game?
Absolutely they do, and I think the business community has some, but it's interesting to me that Mayor Roberts recently was, I think, singled out unfairly by a lot of folks on the other side of the aisle, claiming she was to blame when the last deal they actually offered her was Charlotte repeal its ordinance and the General Assembly will make some modifications to HB2 without being specific what that was. I think we're sort of we're at a standoff here, and that's why I think the bathrooms is what everybody talks about. Let's put that aside and figure out a way to solve that with some rational discussion. But in the meantime, let's make a statement that we don't discriminate. That's what people around the country, that's what businesses want, that's what PayPal wants and Google wants and Apple wants, that we don't discriminate in North Carolina against people based on sexual orientation, and our leaders have not made that statement.
Well, and let's see if we ever get to that point. Mike, in South Carolina, and I know you're not speaking for the bank or for in general, but does South Carolina look at this and say, well, that's one road we're not going to go down, or, not to say they're snickering, to say, gosh, I'm glad we didn't do that, but what's the response in South Carolina?
Well, I think the response has been as you said, North Carolina kind of stepped on the mine, but I happen to agree with a lot of what Chris just shared. I think we have no business discriminating against any particular group, and as you know, I chair the State Board of Education, and obviously we've known for a long time that we've had transgender students in some of our schools in South Carolina, and the way we've dealt with it, we've allowed the local districts, the local schools, the boards, to deal with each one on an individual basis, and that has worked really well in South Carolina. So I agree with Chris that this is bigger than just a bathroom issue. Has
that policy within the school systems, or do you know, Mike, has the policy gone off without exception? And has the General Assembly, has the State House, can they take that model out of the school system and apply it to a broader dialogue about this issue? Well, I think it's interesting with this executive order that came down from the president. Some of the districts immediately thought they had to come in complete compliance with that immediately. And it's not law. It's so they're not complying with the law. So we basically told them just to continue to do what you're doing. Yeah. Okay. And let's see where this thing plays out, because obviously a lot of attorney generals have filed a suit against this, and we need to see how that plays out. Yeah, let's talk about education. So South Carolina's session is over. North Carolina, it seems like the General Assembly is pretty bent on getting out of there by the end of June, and it actually will be a short session. Right. Do you think, let's talk about education in reference to transportation, education and transportation, two hottest issues. Chris, does transportation overshadow what education needs, and can you prioritize transportation over education or vice versa? No, I don't think you can, and I think that we obviously have to do both of those things. We need a strong transportation infrastructure to help businesses, help the economy, help people, and help schools. I think the issue in North Carolina is we have decided to continue to reduce our revenue and cut our tax base. At the same time, we're saying we need more money for transportation and we need more money for education. It was really interesting in this session, the Senate budget recently passed, made further tax reductions, which will cost $145 million a year. At the same time, there was no money to give state retirees a raise. They haven't had one since 2009. At the same time, there's a lot of pressure to figure out new funding mechanisms for transportation, to fund new supplies and classroom supports for teachers. So all this is a giant pie, and I think the public, obviously in most states, in North Carolina, we have separate funds for transportation and education. That's one of the confusing things for the public. It all comes out of their pockets, but I think we need to do a better job emphasizing both of those things. They should not be competing, they should be complementary. Does the $500+ million toward teacher pay, and you could argue that North Carolina's done a fairly decent job with a balanced budget, or at least a surplus, which goes down that road. So I guess the question is here, how is North Carolina going to fund a dramatic increase in teacher pay that's been widely heralded but also encouraged? How do they do that in this budget?
Well, one of the ways they do it is make other cuts to education. The entire education budget increase is teacher pay, so there's a lot of reduction in connectivity at school systems. There's a further reduction in things that classroom supports and other things teachers need. So they're using teacher pay to say, oh, we care about schools, and I do think they care about schools, but they're using education to say, here's what we're doing to help the schools. But in many cases, they're giving teachers a raise and cutting other things to pay for it. So again, it's almost like the question you ask about transportation and education. It's, you know, we can't cut one thing to do another thing and then say we're improving our schools. Teachers need more money, obviously, and then we need to retain teachers and create the best teachers. The Senate decided not to go along with the House program to reinstate a teacher scholarship program to recruit teachers. So the way they're paying for it, I think, is sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul. Is
there a different, no pun intended, is there a different calculus to get to education funding that's fair and equitable?
Well, it's interesting, Chris. I think the General Assembly in South Carolina has punted this ball down the road so many times, both on education and on transportation. And because you've heard me say in the past that they're both infrastructure issues. One just happens to be roads and bridges. The other one is human infrastructure, and they're very closely tied together. Now, the General Assembly just put on the governor's desk of $4 billion over 10 years for transportation. There weren't any real cuts to education, but I happen to think that there's probably enough money in education. It's just how we spend it. So much of it is spent on compliance, and both at the federal level and the state level, and that really needs some transformation to free up more money to get to classrooms and to teachers.
You know, Mike, you've said that before, and I've heard that over and over in South Carolina, that it's not really about the money. So where is the political will to make some hard choices to say, we don't really need more money. We need to be smarter and more strategic about the money that we have in education? Where does it start?
Well, as you know, we started this Transform SC movement 3 years ago in South Carolina.
Out of some frustration.
Out of some frustration just over that issue. And the General Assembly is paying attention to that, because we believe that's the way you get at this ultimately, is from the bottom up. Because it's not a top-down initiative, as you know. It's happening on the field of play, out in the school districts. And we think as we begin to transform what goes on the local situation, that it will then begin to have an impact on the way the General Assembly looks at it. Because one day, we're going to go to the General Assembly and say, look at all the success we've had in doing this, and we've not even talked about money.
Yeah, okay. All right, thank you, gentlemen. Let's bring our guest down here in just a moment. Next week on this program, Dr. William Roper heads up UNC Healthcare, also the dean of the medical school at the University of North Carolina system. He will be joining us again on this program to talk about a provider as well as being a payer to some degree. And then in 2 weeks, or actually 3 weeks, Terry Aiken, CEO of Cone Health out of Greensboro, will also be our guest on this program. And again, talking about some pretty dramatic increases in what providers charge those of us that end up using the healthcare system. Top-line growth is one of the most watched indicators of a company's health and its near-term prospects. But what does revenue growth in a state mean? Does that mean taxes have gone up? Does that mean more people and organizations are paying tax? Joining us now to talk reform, to talk revenue, to talk Tar Heel state policy is the North Carolina Department of Revenue Chief, Secretary Jeffrey Epstein. Your Honor, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Mr. Secretary, you've heard a little of the dialogue before. Here we are pretty close to the end of a short session in North Carolina. Are you encouraged or are you concerned about the dialogue that's going on from your point of view?
Well, in terms of dialogue, we have an excellent dialogue with both the legislature and, of course, the governor on these matters. Work very closely with them as these policies are discussed. We're seeing activity to perhaps tweak the sales tax expansion that was made in the last session. There'll be some changes to that possibly. Also, there's a lot of talk of increasing the standard deduction, which is something else that, again, I think people are in discussions on this now, and whatever it is that they decide to do, we will implement and administer the law.
Does the fairly dramatic reform that happened 3 years ago now, that seems to be pretty successful, and I know you all are very proud of a lot of the heavy lifting, do you find that a lot of that is being kind of lost in the dialogue around the social issue? And I don't mean just HB2, but in general, does it get lost in a lot of the noise around social challenges?
Well, I think it can, and it's important for the governor certainly to get his message out about what's really happened in the state. I know that here the other week it was announced that we are the fastest growing state from GDP growth, 13.4% increase in GDP growth from 2013 to 2015. Obviously, there's been significant cuts and reforms to taxes that have made a big difference. On the unemployment side, we owed a huge debt to the federal government of $2.8 billion. For money that we borrowed from the federal government in order to pay unemployment benefits. We paid that off 5 years faster than we had expected to, and now there's a $1 billion surplus. So there's a lot of great things happening in this economy, 280,000 new jobs in the state. There's fantastic things happening here in the North Carolina economy.
Chris, question?
Well, yeah, I guess I have a couple questions. One would be the challenges of the sales tax expansion. I know the governor was not thrilled last year at some of the services the sales tax was expanded to, car repairs, washer and dryer delivery, warranties, and those sorts of things. What kind of pressure does that put on our sort of lower and middle class taxpayers when they're having to pay sales taxes on things that used to be exempt?
Well, I think, again, that's the challenge and the balance you're trying to create with a lot of these things. You know, tax reform needs to be looked at as a whole and an ongoing and developing sort of situation. It's tough to look at one things that is done on the expansion of sales tax without really looking at the deductions and the reductions that have been made in income tax. But you know, all tax changes, all tax reform hits different people in different ways in different years. But in the aggregate, you know, governor's trying to help the majority of taxpayers in the state and keep moving the state forward.
Did you say you had a couple questions? Or a
Well, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, all right. We've got a lot of time, Chris.
Okay.
Mike, jump in, please.
Mr. Secretary, obviously in South Carolina, we paid close attention to what was going on in North Carolina relative to tax reform, and we kind of saw it as, gee, they really want to be a little more competitive when it comes to economic development and attraction of new business and industry. Can you talk about that? Is North Carolina now more competitive? Is there more economic development, attraction occurring as a result of the reform?
Well, I think there's no question that that's happened. You know, North Carolina here in the last few years has made these huge reductions, whereas before, you know, we had a maximum income tax rate of 7.75% for individuals, 6% for corporations, and that put us to be the highest tax state in all the Southeast. And you know, that may have been okay maybe back in the 70s and 80s when everybody was flocking to North Carolina, but there's a lot of great places in the Southeast to be now. Certainly South Carolina, there's great places to live in South Carolina, great places to live in Tennessee, great places to live all over the place. And you know, we're all even losing development to Alabama, for goodness sake. So there's a lot of good things happening in all these places. And it's tough to stay competitive.
I guess the challenge would be, you mentioned the unemployment system, for example, and the debt was paid back. It was paid back through by employers, but also a reduction in benefits to workers. North Carolina now, only Florida is it more difficult to get unemployment if you're laid off from your job than in North Carolina. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a perception that we may have gone too far, too fast, and if workers paid the share of reducing the unemployment benefits, and now we're at a position where it really is difficult. And so how do you balance trying to be economically competitive with also taking care of people who need help?
Well, I think that is always the challenge, and I think there always is some ebb and flow between it. I can just speak, again, speaking as a former businessman, you know, the differences that these things make. To have these lower taxes makes a difference to people not only looking to locate in North Carolina, but also businesses that are looking to expand here as well. Having lower unemployment tax, you know, we had this 20% surcharge that was on state employers for 10 years. That makes a big difference in the pockets of businesses that are looking to make choices when they're going to hire more people and expand their businesses.
You know, Your Honor, as a member of the governor's cabinet in North Carolina, obviously you're not going to be fair to say that you're just a cheerleader. I know you're more than that, Jeffrey. But do you? I mean, when you're driving in your car by yourself, are you concerned about the brand of North Carolina coming out of this HB2 dialogue? I mean, all of the work that has been done around North Carolina to be progressive, as we talked about in the front of the show, does this derail a lot, and does it cause you concern?
Well, it does, as you said, it makes it difficult for us to get our message out. Look, I've been 27 years in this state. It's been a fantastic place to raise a family. It's been a fantastic place to have a business. And, you know, of course, it bothers all of us to watch the name of the state take a hit, both in the state and nationally. So it's certainly something that everybody thinks about. I think the hope now is that this is now in the hands of the courts, and we're all anxious to see how things turn out.
And not to press you on this, sir, but if we leave it in the hands of the courts, aren't you concerned that it's going to take longer to get a resolution on this than if we take back what this might mean and debate it and get a resolution among ourselves?
Well, again, there's a lot of forces, both internal and external, that are affecting this whole policy. And again, a lot of big decisions need to be made, and the governor, of course, has set out his position. And again, now it's in the hand of the courts, and we're just going to have to see what happens.
Yeah. Mike?
Mr. Secretary, education funding. I think a lot of states are trying to wrestle with what's the right way to fund public education, and is there a new model that you're thinking about, that North Carolina is thinking about, how to better, more effectively fund public education?
Not to my knowledge. I have no knowledge of any different plans are being made to do these sorts of things. Of course, in the governor's budget, he did set out for some pretty significant raises for teachers, something that perhaps has been neglected in previous years. But look, it's important that we have a strong education system, and this is something that I think everybody wants to see happen.
Chris?
Yeah, along those lines, I guess the struggle is the governor proposed a significant pay raise, and as you mentioned, it was overdue. But our per pupil spending is still way below pre-recession levels, and I guess that's the trade-off when you cut taxes. And I think it's worth noting, in 2013, the governor's first State of the State address, he thought tax reform should be revenue neutral. It's going to cost us several $billions a year as we go forward, another $145 million this year. So again, the question, I guess, is how do you balance cutting those taxes and at the same time not funding our schools at the level that they were previously funded?
Look, I think in general, you know, what the governor wants to do is make government more efficient and more effective, but wants to do it at the same time while respecting the taxpayer. And this is a challenge in our state. I think it's a challenge in South Carolina. I think it's a challenge everywhere.
3.5 years ago in South Carolina, it came to light that 6 million plus, but it's safe to say it's 6 million taxpayers, their identity had been compromised as taxpayers. Social Security numbers. Mike, yours probably in there somewhere. If I look hard enough, I could probably find your Social Security number. But does that kind of breach, can that happen again? Can that happen in North Carolina? And does that run shivers down the spines of DOR chiefs?
Well, look, it got the attention of everybody, I think, in government and elsewhere. And it's not only breach in South Carolina, but Home Depot and Target and these other companies that have had these very significant breaches. I can tell you as an agency that we take information security very seriously, and that's much more now than about putting up antivirus or some sort of firewall software. You know, in the modern age now, having a robust information security program means really monitoring your own systems for activity. You know, this is what makes this so insidious, is sometimes these people perpetrating these things break into your system and they don't do anything for months or even longer, and you don't even know what's happening until it's too late. But this is a big issue, I think, again, in society. And what we have to do as consumers, I believe, we can all pretty safely assume our information is probably out there somewhere. And as individuals, it's our job to prevent its use. As the Department of Revenue, it's our job to prevent its use. And one of the things that we're working very hard on is preventing identity theft and refund fraud that comes with it, where people will steal somebody's identity, file a tax return for a refund, and we send it to them, and before we know what's happened, they've already gotten the money and we can't get it back. When you send your tax return into state of North Carolina, it's scored by our exam department. We're looking for anomalies. You know, last year Chris had 2 dependents. This year he's got 5. He has different deductions this year. His income double. Whatever it is, we're looking for things that will set off red flags for us to look and see maybe that's really not Chris. and this is a personal thing for me.
Yeah.
You know, about a year or so ago, one of our assistant secretaries handed me an envelope, and inside it, I opened it up, and inside it was my 2014 North Carolina state tax return. The only thing was I hadn't filed one yet.
Okay. Well, that is scary. We're out of time. I wish we had more time to talk about the security of it. Please come back, because I do want to go down
Thank
that
you for
road
having
again. Your Honor, thank you for being on the program. Best of
Thank you
luck
very much.
going forward. Mike, always nice to see you.
Thank you, Chris. Good
Chris,
to be
we're
with
glad
you.
you're feeling better.
Yeah,
Glad
thank
you're
you.
back.
Thanks for having me back.
Thank you. Until next week, I'm Chris William. Hope you have a good weekend. Good night. So
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care, when and where you need it. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.